Scrapper is kind of a non-entity for me. Sure, I watched the Generation 1 cartoon, but other than the fact that he's the leader of the Constructicons, there's just nothing there. Same goes for pretty much all of his subordinates. The only one who left any impression on me was Mixmaster, the one who's just a little too into chemistry. I never read the comics, so his sole film appearance would be my first impression for the character. And he's a generic with no lines. Wonderful. He was also skipped over in the toy line, as the more famous Constructicons like Longhaul, Mixmaster, and Bone Crusher, Rampage, got toys, but the only plastic representations of Scrapper we got were a Legends class figure and one of the components of Supreme class Devastator. It's a shame that there's no fiction out there that really gives a spotlight on Scrapper. Nope, nothing. Anyway, for this episode of Kit Katastrophe, I'd like to welcome someone who appreciates Scrapper just as much as I do. Please welcome my friend, Arkham Knight Rider.
Welcome to Kit Katastrophe. My name is Arkham Knight Rider, and today we'll be taking a look at Transformers Studio Series Voyager class Constructicon Scrapper. This figure was released in 2020 as part of Wave 9 of the Voyager assortment, and represents Scrapper's appearance in the 2009 film Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. Scrapper's alt mode is an unlicensed front-end loader, and while some might call it messy, I think it works really well. It managed to keep all the parts nice and well placed. The best example is easily the head storage. Instead of it just hanging out there, it's wonderfully tucked into the chest. I also love how the claw is formed. Honestly, it's just well put together, even if you can just see the ball hand underneath.
I mentioned in my Studio Series Scavenger review that the latter portion of the Constructicon lineup were made up of figures whose vehicle modes were compromised for the sake of the robot and combined modes, and Scrapper is no exception. This front-end loader is a lot of things, really. It's big with a nice wide footprint. It's low to the ground, very flat and wide, placed on these 4 massive chunky tires with nicely painted silver rims. The coloration is also well balanced. While the yellow dominates the color scheme, as it should, there's lots of silver and black to break up the monotony. However, like Arkham mentioned, the compromise comes into play when you notice how messy and gappy this mode is. The main body of the loader is incoherent, made up of obvious robot parts, with the scantest of ladders placed to give the illusion that this is a functioning vehicle. The large bucket up front is split into 3 compartments, and while the outer 2 are fine, the middle one doesn't look like it could carry any fine materials like soil or gravel, as the back wall of it is just full of holes due to transformation. Nevertheless, I don't feel this vehicle mode is nearly as compromised as Scavenger's was, and if I can overlook Scavenger, I can overlook Scrapper even easier. At the end of the day, I do really like this alternate mode, mostly for its dimensions and proportions. And as one final high point, the bucket moves up and down. I might just give him full marks for that.
I also want to point out how bulky he feels. It has been a long time since I've held a Studio Series figure that doesn't feel like it will just fly away in the air. The weight also feels very well distributed, which some figures fail to do right. I think it's due to the weight of the rest of the figure is put to the one side, which creates the same heavy feeling that the combiner joint from behind has. This also leads to how well it is put together. I never feel like this robot is just laying underneath. Every part is clearly cleverly placed and used wisely, which puts it way above most Transformers even now. Honestly, the only part that really exposes its robot nature is the chest, but that can be just excused as underneath detail. It may not be the most clean or perfect vehicle mode out there, but it's easily among the most solid Transformers alt modes I have ever played with. I just wish Studio Series figures like Roadbuster, Barricade, Darkly Megatron, and every Bumblebee in Studio Series ever, and Carmo Shatter felt like this.
Just as I thought Scavenger's transformation was initially daunting but turned out to be simple, so too do I feel about Scrapper's. The actual mechanical movements are very simple, and not a lot moves around overall, but the transformation sequence is extremely dynamic, mostly due to how the legs come together. I absolutely love how the loader bucket splits and unwraps itself from the front wheels and rewraps itself around the rear wheels. After that, the arms do a rather subdued bare minimum of movement to get into their robot mode positions, though the central mass of the loader rotates around and coalesces to form a rather convincing torso. As a parallel to Scrap Metal, Scrapper features a dynamic head reveal by opening a door in the chest.
And here is Scrapper in his robot mode, and yeah, he's just so amazing. Every part of this toy feels like a masterpiece transformer in some way. Not only does it look like it directly came from the movie, but it just feels so good. Just like the vehicle mode is very dense and has a quality weight. Every bit of kibble is wonderfully handled and nothing feels extra. The only bit of non-sculpted or out-of-place kibble is the cab on the back, but it manages to look great and blend in perfectly. The sculpted pieces of the figure and the claw might be my favorite parts. The claw piece is wonderfully engineered. It also actually moves and articulates at the mandibles, which is something I always get a kick out of. The ball may not be retractable on a chain, like in the movie, but it still looks perfect and very well handled. The chest plate is really bumpy, it resembles a rib cage, and I kind of love that. I also love how the parts that stick out are yellow and the parts that are underneath are black. Actually, that also brings another thing I love, that being the paint. I adore the color scheme here. Yellow and black is a great color scheme for a Transformer, and might actually be my favorite one, if it weren't for Windblade's color scheme or the pure silver color scheme, which I always adore. My favorite part, though, is the head sculpt. Not only is it wonderfully smooth, but I just love how bug-like it is. It's pure perfection, and is up there with the CD series Shockwave as the best head sculpt in Studio Series. I do want to point out that some people have issues with the legs being permanently bent. I completely disagree with that mindset, honestly. Not only does it remind me from Torgo, from Manos, the Hands of Fate, but it really helps with the hunchback design of the neck and general hunchback design overall. I also love how they handled the feet. Not only did they not make it permanently sideways, which plagued figures like Ironhide and Sentinel Prime, but it is also one of the most clever uses of faux parts I have ever seen. The wheel meant to connect the feet helps with the aesthetic of the feet, as it makes it more fleshed out and less gappy.
I pretty much wholeheartedly agree with everything you've said about Scrapper's robot mode. While Scrapper is one of the most regular humanoid Constructicons, he's far from boring. He's very solidly built with proportions to die for. I admire the heavy-set industrial legs made from hydraulic arms and beefy tires, while the arms are lanky but have a sense of weight to them. I agree that the mechanism by which the bucket locks into the wheels is clever, though I wouldn't go as far as saying they're faux parts, as the wheels are in their normal place in vehicle mode, and the outer section of said wheels spin freely, so I have literally no reason to complain. In fact, I encourage this kind of design. The head sculpt, much like every other Constructicon, is distinct and memorable. I love how flat and wide it is. It reminds me of those brainlet Wojaks in tangible plastic form. The point where I disagree with you, Arkham, is in the knees, but I'll get into that more in the articulation segment. Now, in terms of articulation, Scrapper is not a crapper. Starting at the head, he has a ball-jointed neck, which allows him to look down extremely far, coupled with the transformation joint that allows the whole neck assembly to move up and down a little. And this ball joint allows for an impressive degree of tilt, because the ball joint is at the back of the head, which means it does not allow for much side-to-side action. But the designers at Hasbro countered this by including a joint which allows the ball joint itself to move left and right, which allows for some nice left and right action, which actually looks pretty dynamic from an anatomical standpoint, as the neck allows for a slight curve, and that just looks really cool to me. I don't know why. It just looks really natural for this body type. These shoulders can rotate outwards, and they can rotate forwards and backwards, though they do get caught up on these gray pipes and these gunmetal smokestacks. The biceps rotate 360 degrees, and the elbows bend just about 180 degrees, at least until they hit the forearms, which is really impressive. Both sides can do this, and you know, the right arm can actually get away with possibly a slightly better curl, because the arm itself is a little smaller. The grabby claw extension has another swivel that you can rotate to your desire. It's mostly for transformation, but it does allow for some variation in poses. The entire thing can swivel inwards, and it can open up. That's mostly for transformation, but it is an option. And these little pincer claws can open and close. Meanwhile, on the other arm, this little starburst claw thing can do that. He can shake his fist angrily at passersby and small children. He has nothing in the torso because of the way the transformation works, and there's really no place to include a waist swivel of any kind, an ab crunch either, so it's a little disappointing, but I mean, I wasn't really expecting much in terms of torso articulation on Scrapper. I think his pose ability elsewhere is fine enough, except for one certain exception. The legs can move backwards and forwards really nicely on this big, heavy joint. It's not a ratchet or anything, but there's a lot of friction in here, which means he'll be able to hold, like, any pose, whatever, and if you shake it, those hip joints are not going anywhere. The legs can move outwards slightly, not really. They can move inwards a little bit, and the entire hips can move outwards, though that's more for transformation into limb mode than anything else. The hips, I would say, are a little limited, but you can get a lot of good poses out of them. You can get running poses, kicking poses, stuff like that. Forward and backwards is pretty much unimpeded, but outwards is not, so you can't exactly get him to do a high kick without making him look rather silly. The joint that draws the most ire from me, and this is where I disagree with Arkham Knight Rider on one of Scrapper's biggest limitations, are the knees, because the knees are permanently bent. This is as straight as you can get them, and they can only bend that far, which is not really much at all. I mean, I can see why they don't bend, because on the inside, this piece bangs into this piece, and yeah, there's just nothing to be done about that. But I just wish the legs could have been, straightened out a little bit, so that, that knee bend could be, so that like the knee bend could be a little more meaningful instead of just barely changing anything. I don't really see any reason why the knee joint isn't allowed to move further forward. Maybe it's just dealing with the proportions of all these arms, and it would have to deal with some really clever joint work in the feet or something. I'm not really sure, but it is Scrapper's most severe limitation in robot mode, I think. Though I do have to admit that the knee bend does work a lot better with the hunchback than a straight leg would, but I just wish that the option was there, Otherwise, Scrapper is pretty serviceably articulated, and there's really nothing else wrong with him. He's very much an arms person. Like, his arms are extremely expressive. So if you're gonna pose him with the arms and not the legs. It's best to go into Scrapper's Combine mode by starting in Vehicle mode, as the conversion sequence is a series of slight alterations to that front-end loader. It's all well and good, I suppose, if a little boring compared to the more involved transformations of Scavenger and Rampage, for example.
The actual arm mode itself looks very solid. While it's a bit odd when it comes to how the wheels are connected, but it is extremely solid nonetheless. You can also stand it up tripod style, which actually looks rather neat. But honestly, I have not much to say here. It looks great and it gets the job done.
Part of me kind of admires the whole slightly altered aesthetic of the arm mode, though part of me also wishes that Scrapper just did more to make a more convincing hand. Scrap Metal definitely did a better job on that front for sure. Still, Devastator is shaping up to be one great event.
In conclusion, Scrapper is a beautiful work of art that shines in every mode. He feels great, looks amazing, and transforms wonderfully. He's easily the best Studio Series Constructicon, and is definitely among my favorite Studio Series figures. Right up there with Shockwave, Dark of the Moon Sideswipe, Jet Mode Shatter, MV1 Starscream, Dark of the Moon Optimus Prime. Honestly, if I go on longer, I'll just be repeating myself over and over again. As such, I'll be giving it the rank of Galactic.
Scrapper is a testament to the interesting engineering and design choices of the Revenge of the Fallen era style that I hold so dear, even if he is one of the more mundane Constructicons. With a stunningly dynamic transformation and a truly inspired robot mode, I feel that Scrapper is the absolute zenith of this team, beating out the likes of Scavenger and Scrap Metal. Some of that may be just new toy smell, but I wholeheartedly feel that Studio Series Scrapper is the best Constructicon, and is one of the best entries in the Studio Series line as a whole. I agree that Scrapper deserves the rank of Galactic.
If you liked this video or otherwise found it helpful or informative, then please subscribe for more reviews like this in the future, and feel free to suggest topics for future reviews in the comments.
And I'd like to thank Arkham Knight Rider for his appearance. I urge you all to check out his channel. When we return, we'll be taking a look at another triple-changing Decepticon. This has been Katastrophe. Transform and roll out.